Hello class, today we'll be learning about energy flow through an ecosystem, food webs, and food chains. This presentation was made for a grade 7 science class. The strategies that I have incorporated into this presentation to better include ESL and ELL learners are graphic organizers, visuals, and technological literacy. First, before we start our lesson, let's fill in our KWL worksheets. First, we know what an ecosystem is, what abiotic and biotic characteristics are, and the process of photosynthesis. Then we are going to learn about how energy flows through an ecosystem and what food webs and food chains are. So what are food chains and food webs? Just like ecologists, we are going to break down concepts into smaller ideas to fully understand food chains and food webs. First off, how does a tree get energy and nutrients? All energy comes from the sun. Therefore, the sun is the main energy source in an ecosystem, and it provides energy to plants and animals. A plant will receive energy from the sun, which will allow it to make its own food through the process of photosynthesis, which is why we call plants producers or an autotroph, which means that it makes its own food. Plants are. Next is a primary consumer, which is an organism that eats plants. A deer here is a good example of a primary consumer, which is also known as a herbivore, since it only eats plants. Next is a secondary consumer. This is an example of a wolf. A wolf is a carnivore, which means that these organisms only feed on meat. Next is a tertiary consumer. These are organisms at the top of the food chain and eat meat or plants. A good example of this is a bear, which eats meat such as wolf or deer, but also eats berries from plants. These organisms are called carnivores, which eat only meat, or omnivores, which eat both meat and plants. So what happens when animals and plants die and they start to decompose? And how does this happen? Decomposers. Examples of these organisms are fungi and some insects. These organisms eat away and break down organic matter so that these nutrients can be put back in the soil and recycled through the environment again. All these different organisms that we talked about are connected to each other through a food chain. A food chain is a linear system that links organisms according to what it eats. Organisms are placed in this chain based off what they eat and what eats them. In a food chain, organisms are part of different trophic levels. This is a fancy term for the position of an organism in a food chain. The lowest trophic level is producers, and then it increases to a primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer.